Hey everyone, so I'm pretty excited to finally bring you the ninth episode of The Road, and when we were recording this, I was actually sick at the time, so bear with me. So we're first going to take a look at the polls in Lockdown's last episode of The Road. First question was the Armory update needed? And 80% of people said yes, while only 19% said no. I'm not sure where the last 1% went, but I definitely agree with this. I think something needed to happen with the Armory because it stayed the same for so long, and with all the tunes updating as well as mods, weapons really did need a boost. The next thing that we looked at was the best third slot tier 4 ability, and there's an overwhelming response of tough. So this third slot tier 4 ability would be the double attack with crit, and everyone is thinking of Priya here. Priya with a double attack and rampage weapon is still devastating, even today. Lastly, does the Armory need to be balanced? 73%, so an overwhelming number of you said that it should all be balanced. 10% said that there's just some buffs that need to happen, but there should be no nerfs, and that's specific to Priya with Rampage. And a small portion said only buffing, no nerfing any abilities, and others just hope that they don't do anything. And I'm guessing this has to do with the people who have the ability, like Rampage. And one of the comments from Captain Walker Slayer on the video said, "Personally, I say I liked it when the Armory was updated, but the thing I don't like is Armory tokens. They are hard to get. I have only upgraded one weapon to 5-star, and the one for free. I feel like they should make it more available. Another issue I have is running out of parts for it. I had to buy the acid from the League store, and I was still one short, but it can work." So thank you, Captain Walker Slayer, for sharing that with us. I completely agree. Like in the later weeks, we have had a roadmap where we can farm some Armory tokens, but the quantities are in such low amounts that it's hardly farming. In this episode, I'm joined by Lockdown, and we're going to be talking about WOC, which just happened. And our first topic is going to be on the qualifications.
Hello, nice to be here. It's good to talk about this topic.
Yeah, so Lockdown, how was your experience with WOC? Like, were you a part of the qualifications at all? Was it really clear to you how you were going to qualify?
For me, being in one of the main regions, I guess, I was kind of fortunate I was in a 1A and 1B region from the get go. I knew how it was going to work. I did see a lot of people who didn't understand how it's going to work, however, but for me, biggest issue for me was I was in a 1B region with a TOC finalist region, and we didn't get put into War of Champions qualification. And then my other region, because I play two regions, of course, I'm like that. And my other region is actually in 1A, didn't even qualify for TOC. So it was really strange for me how that worked out. It was very hard for the region that I was in 1A with because we're coming up against some really, really powerful factions, of course. It was like, what was it, two wars, two CRWs for qualification. So every single time, it was just rock hard qualification every single time.
Absolutely. I think it was 5 or 6 wars that made up how you qualified for WOC. Like, of course, you play in those two regions, and I think Moon plays with you in the 1B region. And him and I
Correct.
actually spoke a bit about how he almost wished he had the chance to join in on the qualifications, especially after it was changed later on. Like, at first, it was pretty clear you had to be in a 1A region, and I feel sorry for you that, your TOC region that, went so far was all of a sudden not classified as a 1A region. It just seems like we were forced to buy keys, and, some players can do that, some players can't, and some people just like their region that they're in. So it kind of felt like some people's hands were forced unnecessarily.
I don't think some people understood that they couldn't be in War of Champions until it was too late. Like, this is the first time they did it. I know they unlocked transfers a couple of times, but some people were still like, wait, I can't be in War of Champions? And that's in people in 1B.
Absolutely, because there were those 2 wars that you mentioned at the beginning where you didn't have to be in a 1A region. You could be in a B or a C, I believe, even, and then transferred to a 1A. But there was a very short time to transfer over. And of course, you had to find a strong faction in order to actually qualify. As you mentioned, there were just some insane teams out there, some very top heavy factions. And it was always a struggle from the beginning.
and with how fast the meta was changing from the first war for qualifications to the last war, and then even during War of Champions, it was just kind of insane because you needed commitment from people for a solid 3 or 4 months. And when the regions locked, it became even more difficult because retirements happen and there's no one to really bring in because you don't want to take the other players from your region from the other factions. And at the same time, if you do that, all of a sudden you have no one to play with in your region anymore. There's just no competition.
Yeah, and obviously there are some regions that are bigger than others as well. There's going to be some much smaller regions. I guess it's sort of it puts people in a position where they've been friendly with their entire region, and then you've got to start basically potentially stealing people from other factions, like you say. That probably plays part and parcel into why you don't want to do it, because you've got relationships within the region, and I guess you want to transfer back to the region you came from, that sort of thing afterwards. So there is life after WOC, so you've got to keep those relationships kind of solid as well. So
Absolutely. Like in my region of Blount, both my faction, Twilight Princess, and Walkers, who came in second in WOC, so shout out to Walkers there. With us both qualifying from the same region, I know that there were some factions from other regions who also had multiple qualifications, but it just became difficult as time went on because we weren't going to be taking, from Walkers. Walkers wasn't really taking from us. There were some players who, stepped down and stepped out a bit from Walkers, and like just to show you the caliber of players that they had, we ended up taking up a couple of them. In WOC, we actually took on one of their players, and he was a great contribution to us. So shout out to Saint there. And it was just hard. We ended up taking another player just for WOC from our region. We reached out first to players in our region who qualified as one of the top 175 players with a high war score, because we wanted to have some representation from our own region just to show like the general strength. And we wanted to show some, I'll call it favoritism here, because, I'm proud about what our region has been able to do. And I really like the people that are in it.
yep, that makes a lot of sense.
So, everyone, what was your experience with qualifications? Do you think it was clear enough on how to qualify, or was it slightly confusing just because of the changing rules as it kind of went along, especially later on when they introduced the top 175 players that were in a 1A region but did not qualify with a faction?
The experience of WOC here, like I myself was a player, but I know that you Lockdown as well as some other content creators had a mini account actually moved into the region. I know that Chantel Hawk ended up doing a video recently where she touched base on attacking some of the players that were still in the WOC region, not with a strong team, but just to kind of analyze the teams and the tunes that were used along with weapons and mods. So, like, did you try any of that while in there, and what was your general feeling of the region while residing?
I did not raid any of the teams, mainly because I have hit some of these teams before. I did come up against like Pandas, I think some of Scorched Earth, when they were a different faction name, when I was in CRW. So I knew the kind of factions, full Mercer teams basically a lot of the time. But my experience as a content creator was great. Like I'll be honest, like having that as a content creator is really nice to be able to spectate. Even I did a couple of streams basically just to see the end of day scoreboards, progress, and I kind of like, as much as I'm not seeing the gameplay, I can't zone in on any of the wars to see the points or anything like that. It's sort of like the overall experience, like the story behind War of Champions, to see people fighting it out, and I like it. It's been, like you said, it's been months. How many? 4 months of progress?
Something like that.
You want to see how it ends, and if the content creators weren't there, if you didn't qualify, there'd be no coverage, pretty much. So it is good that we get a little bit of coverage for War of Champions. But what about yourself? Like, you actually played, you were very focused on your own point of view. What was it like for you?
It was a struggle, to be honest. Like, I knew it was going to be difficult going into War of Champions because, it's kind of like the best of the best, per se. And all the teams there were great. There was a lot of strong defenses, a lot of the turn one defenses. You saw your Mercer leads, you saw your Angel leads, round and round it went. I found everyone was pretty helpful as well in the region. We actually made a crafting faction so people could just jump in and out, and most people were pretty good. about letting the Crafton faction just kind of sit on those territories. So everyone was able to kind of move in and move out, and it was just a good overall feel. The region itself was very active, and I had a lot of content to stream, thankfully. I think I did about 14 hours of streaming. And of course, we didn't always face the best of the best. Like, we're already in the best region that there was. And I don't mean to say that, like, the best region for feeling or anything like that, but the top players. And it was just an honor to be there among them. There was a lot of, positive play I found. I don't think anyone could really hold any faction in wars, and it was all just really quick. With only 30 minutes for each war, 100,000 points really didn't seem that much of a difference from one place to another place, especially with the 24,000 point bonus. So I really enjoyed my experience there. I know that my experience was different than the other content creators, and I feel lucky that I had the opportunity to make it.
Well, I'd say it was less luck than you did. Your faction did qualify, so I think the other creators could maybe be lucky. I guess you can feel lucky that you were there, but your faction definitely did deserve to be there. You weren't like lower down. I think, what place did you qualify in? Do you remember?
Yeah, we ended up qualifying in 28th overall. But I think the thing I was proudest about was that we didn't have any bans or suspensions from our faction. I won't lie. I was a little nervous because you never know with people, especially like the ones you trust the most can sometimes be the ones that you're just unsure of at the same time. And I know that a lot of top factions, a lot of medium factions, a lot of factions in general got hit with that ban wave and that suspension wave. And it became very difficult to pick up other players to fill those positions.
So, everyone, did you end up having a positive War of Champions experience, or do you think there's something to be desired in the next War of Champions? Also, it was recently announced that before the next WOC, that they're actually going to have another ban hammer. My personal opinion is that cheaters should not be able to play this game at the same level as the other players who play with integrity. There's lots of spenders who feel like their dollar is undervalued because you have people getting things at a cheaper price or even for free in some cases.
So how many points did you actually score during War of Champions?
Well, I grinded out 500,000 points. It took a long time, and I actually got that on stream, and everyone can kind of see me fleeing 3 matches before fighting in the last one because I only needed a few hundred points to reach that milestone. I really wanted to get Steve, so that was the last milestone I had to hit. But there were some really fantastic players playing in WOC. There's quite a few players who scored actually over 1 million points. The ones that come to mind right now are Sly from Walkers. He had like 1.3 million or something. Double Dose was also in Walkers with about the same. Dave the Third from Scorched Earth had a bit under that, and Vendetta had about 1.25 million from VV. So as you see, like, there were some top-notch players in WOC, and shout out to anyone else who scored really well. Anyone who really hit that 500k milestone, like, that's pretty amazing in my opinion, especially for those who did it a lot more effortlessly than me.
Do you know who actually scored the highest amount of points in the whole weekend?
I am pretty sure the person who scored the most amount of points was Sly from Walker. And
Okay.
it wasn't by much. It was only by like 10 or 20,000 points in total, which for personal points, that's quite a bit. But when you're getting down to having over 1 million points, it's very small in comparison.
Oh, for sure.
What I really liked about War of Champions overall, I think, were the rewards. Like, not just the milestones, but the rank rewards as well. I found it really kept everyone engaged, regardless of if you were the first place faction or the 40th place faction. Just, it seems like a good step up, and I would love to see some of that kind of incorporated into wars in the future. Like, not on the same caliber, but still having the things that we really do need.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely something I noticed from watching, is that even up until the last 2 hours, because I just made sure to get the last couple of hours, the bottom factions who, let's be honest, they were getting wrecked most of the time. I think a couple of the factions came out of it less than 10 wins, over 100 losses. but they were still warring because the rewards in the milestones were that good, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
how much it would be beneficial for them. And I think for the wider player base, doesn't necessarily have to be a plat mod there. Literally just some collection items for characters,
Yeah.
something other than what we get at the moment, which is nice gear, but it isn't flashy. It's just sort of standard progress, standard what you've got to grind for. Most people would see that like, would I want to work hard for this when I could just wait for my league store to reset, sort of thing. And war is not easy for a lot of people, so giving them good rewards, why not? I saw
Mm-hmm.
some people in the bottom factions getting like 250 and 500k and more, so it was definitely worth it for them.
Yep, absolutely. Because like we aren't just looking at those platinum mods as you mentioned. Like there were also S-class items for the new Steve, but that could easily be replaced with like a choice box for some of the S-class items of even some of the earlier tunes that a lot of players don't have many of, or a fraction of the newer ones. Because what they did in some of the boxes for the rank rewards, actually they offered like 2,000 Steve cards, for example, and then it might have been only 1,000 S-class cards of some of the more recent tunes. So to me, it's like it's a nice trade-off to have those options available to you. And I think the other big thing for rewards were the Armory tokens, which I feel like we've reached a big bottleneck at, where many players are not able to craft or even research anything that they might need in the future. And it's just really time consuming and tedious to try and get 100 tokens here and there in the arenas, for example.
Yeah, yeah. You would have come out of war with quite a lot of armory tokens there, right? You hit 500k and your placement rewards what, 100,000 probably?
Yeah, so my placement got me 50,000 armory tokens, and then for milestone rewards, I got over 100,000 tokens there. But I'm already starting to dwindle just because of the things I've had to research and the weapons that I've wanted to make a 5-star. Because to make one 4-star weapon a 5-star, it's 50,000 tokens, and with how difficult they are to come by, it's a real grind to get them, and you spend them faster than you can get them for sure.
Yeah, I don't spend them that much. I do weekly crafts on my live streams, and mine's just disappearing. I managed to get a rampage weapon, and I was like, "Oh, this is great!" But then I realized I have to drop 50k to 5-star Priya's weapon to make it actually viable, and
Hmm.
I was sort of in a position where I'm bankrupting myself for future streams on just crafting, just basically crafting 2 times a week. Nothing too extreme.
Hmm.
I think the inflow there, totally different topic, but the inflow of armory tokens is a massive issue. But I was very jealous when I saw those milestones and rewards. I think that being in a reward structure for normal CRW doesn't have to be the sort of standard of armory tokens,
Hmm.
but having some armory tokens there would be pretty nice.
Yes, and I completely agree with that, especially considering our 200,000 milestone, or I think it's 150,000 right now is our maximum. Either or, I can't recall for normal CRW, but we only have really one item available to us for that last milestone. It would be pretty easy, at least in my head, just adding some armory tokens there or some league tokens, because as you mentioned before, like we're right now bottlenecked for gear as well, and people are waiting on that to refresh every week. But then you're using all these tokens, and there's no way you can get the other valuable things there, which might include, you might want some gold mods, or you might want a GPS in a canteen, which is still 18,600. You might want some varnish or some engine grease, and it's just a huge cost to the player.
It would be really nice to see additional milestones that have armory tokens included. Without the armory tokens, everyone's really bottlenecked on making new weapons, and weapons are definitely a prominent part of the game. Do you guys think that armory tokens should be added as a milestone reward in the current war structure, or do you think that it should be added somewhere else in the game?
So some of the improvements that we feel could happen for the next War of Champions could be like understanding the process a bit better for players who are trying to qualify, because there were just so many changes that were made, especially late in the game. I would say the bans that happened, so the bans and the suspensions that happened, you know, almost 99% of the way to WOC. Just before getting into it, we're told that these players are getting axed, either completely banned from the game or they're getting a suspension, and all of a sudden you're scrambling to fill these, maybe 1, 2, 3, up to I think 8 spots for this war. And it was difficult for factions to kind of manage who could they bring in. And I think the process could have just been clearer on the top 175 players outside of the top factions that qualify. If it was said at the beginning, I feel like there's a lot of players that might have moved to these 1A regions to try and qualify as an individual, or just players who would have warred a little harder in their designated factions where, they enjoy playing, but they might have taken an extra weekend off because, my faction's not going to qualify for WOC. I would like to, but I'm not going to be given that opportunity just based on where I enjoy playing my game.
Yeah, I agree. I think some people probably would have taken the last, CRW a bit easier if their faction was nowhere near qualification. So having that knowledge would have been nice. I think the process is this needs to be the cemented process now, though. What we had happen this time, I think bans, like you said before, need to happen on a bit more of a regular basis. There needs to be some sort of automation every month or two. I know it's probably a lot harder work than we assume in terms of like getting all the details, and some of these suspensions are going to be based off of very, very small things, not obvious as well. So that is difficult. What I will say about the experience is I was watching is Dan Why So Serious's video about War of Champions, and I've watched his videos before, and he's a good player. He is a solid player, but he was in Walkers, so he was in a top 2 faction of War of Champions. And from what I saw from that video was he wasn't really allowed to war so much based on the fact that there were heavier hitters than him in his faction. And I think when it comes to War of Champions weekends, it can be difficult. This isn't so much... It's hard for really anything that Scopely can do here to make the experience better for people for the next War of Champions. So I don't really know where any improvements can come in here, but he was just basically limited to hitting 50k and then was told to sit out by his own faction. And that's frustrating, especially for a content creator, but that's frustrating. But what can you think about any sort of improvements? Do you think there's any improvement that Scopely could do there, or is it literally just it's up to factions to decide how they're going to the strategy they're going to take into War of Champions?
I think it's down to the faction, to be honest. I don't think that part is on Scopely. Like, I watched Dan's video as well, and you kind of have to gauge where your ability is within your faction and understand your faction's goals. Like, he's a really good player. He hits really fast. It's a general strategy that a lot of top factions do use, especially in WOC, where it just becomes very top heavy because they want those quick wins. And unless you're able to compete and keep up, it's difficult for those factions to cycle you in. Like, I know that we ended up getting a player from Walkers. They're one of our top scorers in Twilight Princess, and of course we made WOC. We came in 21st, so about halfway down the pack. And it just goes to show you that even if you're a top player in one of those top factions, like, it doesn't mean you're going to be the best one there.
So for those of you who qualified for War of Champions 2, did you end up playing with a faction that you qualified in? Or did you end up joining a new one? If you did join a new one, let me know in the comments section below what the circumstances were for that.
Kind of wrapping things up here, do you have any closing points or remarks, Lockdown?
One thing I did wonder about is that, are there any sort of stories from within War of Champions that maybe people from outside don't really know about? Is there anything that happened during War of Champions?
Well, I guess one of the most unique things that I thought happened in War of Champions was a faction called Misfits popping up, where it was all the players who, didn't have a faction to be in. They might have come as an individual, or they just didn't want to war extremely hard. And, it was just a faction that was kind of brought up out of the blue. Everyone got involved, and I love to see the participation there. And shout out to Mike for organizing that. You were heavily recruiting a lot of players who were just looking to play and have a good time at War of Champions. So thank you for doing that.
Overall, would you say War of Champions was a positive experience or a negative one, or are you kind of just indifferent towards the whole thing? And thank you so much to Lockdown for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you everyone else for tuning in to this episode of The Road. I'm so sorry for being so late with this video. There's just been a lot going on. I was trying to finish up things with school. My dog ended up passing. I ended up getting a concussion. And right now there's COVID-19 going on. So it's definitely been a time. Let me know in the comment section below what your plans are for WOC3 because that is coming up very soon. And we just had some information drop regarding it. I'm personally super excited for it and can't wait to try and qualify with my faction.